Hello, my name is Latimer and I do a very wide variety of work that ranges from everything from printing and painting to assemblage and interactive pieces. Henri Bergson, he's a French philosopher, and he's prompted me to explore different ways that we fill space with memory. Joseph Cornell, he's an artist who makes these beautiful little assemblage boxes. Viktor Frankl, he's a psychologist and Holocaust survivor. It's only recently that it's become interactive. Bergson believes that as we get older, we become petrified. Basically, we just stop living. And we stop seeing things that are in front of us. We tend to fill it with memory because we're just being really lazy. He was a strong believer in something called vitalism, trying to be as present as possible. Viktor Frankl wrote a book called Man's Ultimate Search for Meaning. In that book, he felt that a man must lose himself in something else or someone else in order to truly become himself. He talked about actually this example of a child at play. Child's playing, they're just being themselves and they're engrossed in whatever they're doing, but then the moment that you take a photograph of them, they become really self-conscious. There's a place where these two ideas could meet in a really nice way. A lot of my work invites people to fill spaces with memory, like Bergson suggested that we do, but not in a way where people are petrified or not living. I wanted people to really be active in doing this like a child at play. They're losing themselves in something else. So there's this reflection, this presence, this awareness in a healthy way. I think it would be pointless. Like I said in regards to the previous question, when somebody loses themselves in something and they become themselves, I feel the act of becoming is the work. It doesn't necessarily mean that all my work is physically interactive. There is some of my work where you're mentally or emotionally interacting with it. There are some bits that were boxes on the wall. They just appeared to be empty boxes. There were pieces that I had put there for people to fill with memory and with their own feelings. This is from a book called The Poetics of Space by Gaston Bachelard. We comfort ourselves by reliving memories of protection. Something closed must retain our memories. Memories of the outside world will never have the same tonality as those of home. And by recalling these memories, we add to our store of dreams. We are never real historians, but always near poets. And our emotion is perhaps nothing but an expression of a poetry that was lost. That accompanied these boxes. And sometimes I feel like that's enough to guide somebody and spark some kind of feeling in them using someone else's words, someone else's writing. It's just creating an experience for the viewer, but it is the way that they feel. Whether it's the shrine piece that I had where people are picking objects and putting them on the shrine, or whether they're looking at a painting or they're looking at one of these empty boxes. It's that act of filling the space, losing themselves in something and maybe discovering something outside of themselves. This was part of the shrine, but the shrine was supposed to originally be characteristic of more of a linear growth process. But I had this tutorial with a tutor named Sarah Trillo. Sarah said, "Is this to do with Aeneas and the Golden Bough?" She tells me the story about Aeneas loses his father. He finds out that if he gets a piece of this golden bough, that he can go to the underworld and visit his father. He goes through quite a bit to get the golden bough, and then goes through all these bits of the underworld, and he finally finds this corner where his father is, and his father's just a shadow. He went through all of that just to hug his father's shadow. And it was that moment that I started to look at this piece and think, this is not a linear thing, this type of growth. This is cyclical. We go through all this shit to get this beautiful thing, and we know when we get this beautiful thing that we're going to end up back in this dark place again, because we don't get to keep anything. We lose everything eventually, and we still make the choice to love. We still choose that. I think that memory and grief are inextricably connected. So people were invited to take a piece of junk, or there was a selection of fragments of poems that Katie Szyszko had chosen to put in a box. They would think of a memory to attach to it and then just place it on the shrine. I didn't ask people to tell me what their memory was, so a lot of it was just invisible work, and you really weren't sure what memory was sitting next to another memory, and there was something a little bit magical about that. No. I mean, all right, let me give some credit to some folks who did actually follow instruction, but it's really rare unless they're verbally prompted. Pictures that I picked up at a boot sale of someone's life, they were left out on a table to let people categorize them however they wanted so they could write a label. Some people did categorize them, but other people really just wanted to look through some pictures, so they just sorted through them, they just looked at them, they moved them around, but they generally didn't write categories. And they mess up other people's categories while they're doing it, but we didn't care. It was fine. That was the whole point of this exhibition, was that there was no wrong way, despite there being directions, because it wasn't in the directions we were giving them, it was in them being able to lose themselves. And if that's how they were going to lose themselves in something, then that's okay. And for some people, that was just looking through photos. Rosie had this really cool piece. People were a little bit nervous to interact with it. She had all these pieces of shells and rocks and stones and things that were set up on the top really neatly. You'd open this file cabinet they were on top of and look through the folders and see that actually there's pictures of each of these things. And finally, at the show, there was one guy who was like, hey, can I move all these pieces? It's the only person who asked the entire time. Rosie was like, yeah, I don't care what you do with them. I've never said that anyone couldn't. I think we got really excited when we thought that somebody had stolen a rock. Oh wow, someone really broke the rules. This is great. I think there's a really interesting dynamic when you step into a white wall gallery space. People just generally don't have permission to touch things. Brewery Tap actually looks like a traditional white wall space, so we had to do lots of things to let people know that it was interactive. In the beginning, we stood back when people came in and people weren't really interacting. Eventually we put even a sign outside that said interactive exhibition because we didn't want to put signs on the work, you know, interact with me, play with me, because that felt a little bit tacky or too much. We also found that if we approached people that they would be a little bit some people really did want to talk. They did want to ask questions. It was finding that balance and trying to feel people out as they came in. The more there were remnants of people interacting with the work, people began to be okay with it. Out of my pieces, projection had the most interaction, hands down. It was such a simple task. The directions, like I said, do not matter. They are irrelevant. Or to build a memory with what was at hand. People would finish and they felt guilty and they felt the need to tell you, it's not a memory, I just really like it and this is just what I made. But interestingly, I think even when people did make something that they felt wasn't a memory, it's influenced by something they've seen, something that they've heard, remember, they're putting it into this piece. So whether they meant to or not, they were either combining memories or building memories or creating a new memory really in that moment. I wanted to create spaces specifically for people to fill with their own memory. Maybe it would be a familiar shape or formation or a pattern. People would see that and they'd decide in their mind it was that. First monoprint I did looked a lot like a coastline, and so did the ones following that. I really wanted to challenge people's perception. I created more and more that were similar, but each one would maybe jar the perception you had of the previous one. So you might think this looks like a coastline or an aerial view, but the next one you'd look at it and think, but maybe that's a moon, so maybe this is the sky, kind of flitting through all these different memories, and it's just transforming as their eye moves across it. I would say this whole thing was just one collaboration after another. First, obviously, there were the people who were in the exhibition. Started off to just be Katie, Szyszko, Rosie, Durant, and myself. We decided to go ahead and just do it with the three of us because we thought, you know, actually this is probably really beneficial because we can just make decisions really easily. It meant that there were less hands to do things. We did end up involving other people, but first, the person that we involved before the exhibition started was someone who was across the world. Katie Szyszko showed me this website called my90stv.com. This guy in California named Joey Cato collected all of these videos from the 90s, put them all in this one place you know, on this website. Virtual television, you can channel surf, choose the year, can choose the contents. I said to Katie, you know, why don't we just ask him if he wants to be a part of this? And he didn't only do 90s TV, he's actually done 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s, and aught. Katie messaged him and he was just ecstatic. I've worked with him on making a thing to hold the iPad to display his creation. There was one option that was just really simple. Yeah. The iPad would sit in that, this frame would sit on the wall. People would then be able to interact with the website. That way people could choose the year, choose whatever. But I had this idea, I wanted to make it regardless, so I made this TV. It took ages, so I was actually kind of really hoping that Joey did choose the TV. I showed him and I tried to be as unbiased as possible. But obviously with this one, you wouldn't see the television on the website. We would have to zoom in so you just saw the screen and people wouldn't be able to interact. That was the downside. But being just as much into nostalgia as I am was totally down with having the TV. We made this little viewing area for the TV. Placed cards that I had when I was a kid. Mickey Mouse cards I used to play before school, so it was giving people this option to reenact memory from my childhood. We thought it was cool to have it kind of next to the TV where they're sitting, watch television and have this sort of childlike experience. Katie had this really beautiful Saturday morning writing workshop. We had to explore our memory through these run-on sentences. She'd give us a starting point, but the sentence could never have a full stop. I actually still practice using that exercise as part of my creative process. Quite early on, I had this idea about what would it be like if people wrote down 3 words for a memory and musicians interpreted them, and it was like a game of telephone. We approached Freerange, went to their rehearsals. It was actually suggested by one of the members of Freerange that we didn't just include 3 words pertaining to memory, but also one feeling. This memory that someone would write down as 3 words, they think that it really captured the experience for them, but someone else could interpret those words entirely differently. So sometimes people wouldn't even necessarily realize that their memory was being played. And we also decided that instead of finishing a performance that was one memory, that we would keep it going. So instead of stopping, we would begin to pass around a new word. And slowly the performance would morph into this new memory. We also did some collaboration with these amazing visual communication students, Cody Wild and Erin Rose Paget. They agreed to film the evening for us and they did such an amazing job, very professional. And last but not least, you, Allie. So Allie has not only filmed the exhibition, but she collaborated with Katie to make this beautiful video piece about memory and the body. Yeah, absolutely. You would go to watch Joey's TV and the piece right next to it is Katie's blanket fort. People were welcomed to climb in and write a childhood diary entry with a fluffy pen. There were all these fairy lights on, but you'd hear 90s television and it would just bring you straight back to being a kid. The whole thing was kind of built that way. There was a photograph of my mom which interacted with the TV. This photo to me, despite the fact that my mom is not in it, is a better representation of a moment from my childhood than some of the pictures that are just blatantly of me. I actually took this picture myself. If you look really closely, there's actually a cartoon on TV. This piece was kind of on a pillar and you could see this TV, which was really similar to the television in the background playing. You could almost hear it coming straight out of this picture. I don't know, actually, but they've been with me a really long time. There's something about them that's really timeless. You can't quite tell when they're from. Maybe Victorian era, a bit later. There's like a high neck dress that she's wearing. They kind of seem like hippies before hippies. They've always just been in my kitchen. So I really wanted to include them in this. There were 2 actually. One of them was during the Freerange show. There was this group of ladies that kind of wandered in off the street. My partner was at the door asking people to pay entry with a memory by writing down 3 words and a feeling. And 2 of the ladies were quite happy to oblige, and one of them was just a little bit skeptical. But she wrote down this memory about the day that her dad died. Towards the end of the show, Phil had grabbed 2 memories out of the hat that he felt quite different from one another. One of them was just somebody's Monday. The words were Monday, cat, writing, feeling cold. And then the other one was this lady's memory from when her dad died. The words were something like 9 years old, father died, feeling devastated. And I'm looking at the two memories thinking, this memory of somebody's mundane Monday being performed alongside this person's traumatic life event would kind of trivialize it. But it was already going around. I thought, just let it happen, see what happens. And one memory is going along one side and the other memory is being passed along this way. And there's a point where two sides of the room are playing two different memories. And there's a point where they meet and they pass each other. Like just ships passing in the night. You know, you felt like they could have been happening on the same day. And the show ended and this lady seeks out my partner. She says to him, "Thank you. Truly, that was beautiful." Another moment that stuck with me. This lady approached me. She said, "You see that radio? When I was young, I fell in love with a man who said he would take me away to an island in Greece." And he did. They had this life together, very in love. One of his favorite hobbies was to use shortwave radio to talk to people from around the world. QE2, Australia. Then he died. She said that ever since that she's felt maybe more close to the beyond than she does to the real world, especially in moments like this when she shows up to a shrine and finds that there's a radio that she can place on it. So there's a couple pieces that have remains. The typewriter, toolbox, the photos. So the typewriter will be put on exhibition again. I did choose transparent paper on purpose. Is when you roll that back up, all these memories become layered and you can just see all these words on this scroll. I'm not 100% sure what I want to do with that yet, but I have a few ideas in mind. The photos and the categories that people made, I might use that information later on in making some artwork. I'm actually quite interested in seeing how people archive things and categorize them, and then creating pieces out of the way that they've categorized them. The toolbox, which I actually haven't talked about yet, is called Outdated Coping Mechanisms. Do not use. It wasn't interactive. I typed out really unhealthy coping mechanisms. What things do you do that you wish you didn't do anymore? It seemed to be a piece that people wanted to interact with, so I grabbed some paper and it just blew up. And the shrine, we burnt the bottom half of an effigy bonfire. A few reasons. One was very practical. We had one less car to transport work. And it just wasn't going to fit. And the thing was just falling apart. Just like the outdated coping mechanisms, it's about letting go of things that no longer serve you. Katie had actually already come up with this idea of having a bonfire to burn her tree that had ribbons on it. It was a piece where people were invited to think about a memory, reflect on it, and then choose a color ribbon. They tie it on, very similar to wish trees. She decided, I don't have a place for this in my house. We'll have a bonfire to celebrate the end of this exhibition. Put them on the fire, said some words. We played charades very badly. A lot of people who came to the exhibition came out to close it off with us, and I don't think it could have ended more perfectly.
Memories keep the fire alive. That's beautiful, isn't it?